about cake. This time I'm making masks. Why? Because with the COVID-19, I had to stop my work and I decided to help around and doing some masks. I didn't like the patterns that were out there. Most of them were the pleated ones, like they use at medical facilities, but I don't like the way I breathe on them. So I decided to make my own pattern. A lot of people know that before I started making cakes, I used to design clothing. So making patterns for me is pretty easy. The first thing I did was make sure that the pattern fit my face. The size of the mask can be changed depending on how big or small you want them. Some people like them to go underneath the chin, other people like them smaller. This one goes from the top of the nose, and I prefer mine to be a little bit under the chin, but not bigger than that. This one is the adult size, but I like to use for me the petite size. I also made it bigger on the area of the nose so there's breathing space. I will post the pattern in my website. I have three sizes, one for adults, one for petite women or teenagers, and one for children. And it can be made smaller if you want. Just measure from the nose to the side of your ear and see if you want to change that length, or even from the top of your nose and your chin, and just you can play with that. To make a mask, you will need at least a third of a yard of fabric. I use 4 layers of fabric for this mask. The pattern includes the top part, then you have a lining, and then you have a pocket. The pocket is open so you can place inside it a filter if you want added protection. For each part of the pattern, you want to cut 2 pieces. That means 2 pieces of the top part, 2 pieces of the lining, and 2 pieces of the pocket. You want to use good quality fabric with a tight weave. I am using quilting fabric. It has a tight weave and it fits perfectly and is airy so you don't sweat a lot. For my mask, I am using an interfacing and I am making sure to use an interfacing that has no glue. If you wonder why, it's because some people say that the glue used in some of them have some chemicals that are not good to breathe in. So when you wear them in your face, you're constantly breathing those chemicals. I don't know how far this is true or not, but I decided to stay safe and use an interfacing that has no glue. This interfacing I'm using, I used to use in corsets for brides' wedding dresses. It can be stiff, but it moves, so it's very comfortable. But it maintains the shape, especially if you want the mask to stay away from your face. You want to use the top pattern to cut this lining. And I do suggest that when you cut this to make sure you cut it perfectly because this is the base of your pattern. So even if the top part is not perfectly cut, at least you can fix it with this. Once you have everything cut, you're ready to get started with your mask. Just make sure that you have 2 pieces for each pattern and you can change colors if you want. Like for the top, I'm gonna change one side in one color just to have fun and do the other side in the plain black. If you're wondering why you have 3 pieces for this pattern, is because most of the time people will cut top and bottom the same size. But if you do this with this pattern, you will have a lot of fabric towards the inside of the mask and you want to avoid that so you don't have to be breathing on top of the fabric. So you will see that your lining is a tad smaller than the top pattern. You will also see an arrow in the pattern that marks the grain of the fabric. So you want to align that with the grain of your fabric. Once you have everything cut, you can get started sewing your mask. One thing I always like to do is iron everything, especially because I wash my fabrics before I start sewing. That way, I make sure everything is nice and flat. Ironing, as you saw, is more time consuming, but it makes a huge difference on the finish of your garment or whatever you're making. Once you have ironed everything, you want to start sewing. I am separating my interfacing and making sure that both sides are face to face. That way, I make sure my top sides are showing up, especially if you have a fabric that doesn't show very well which side is the top or the bottom. But with quilt fabrics, usually this is easy. You can see that very clearly. Like I said, I'm using different patterns for my mask just to have fun, but you can stay with the same pattern everywhere. I'm gonna be using clips, or you can use pins to make sure that everything is holding well before I start sewing. Since this interfacing doesn't have glue, you're gonna have to go around the mask to make sure everything stays put. Once you're ready, just sew all around your mask. Around a quarter of an inch should be enough. This is just to make sure that the fabrics stay together. Do both sides of the mask, and once you're done going around, make sure to clip your threads and you want to cut the excess fabric. This is the excess fabric I'm talking about. I know it's not a lot, but when you're sewing, if you count that as part of your seam, you would have different sizes. This is why I said to you when you were cutting the interfacing to make sure that the interfacing was perfectly cut. Just in case that you cut your fabric a little bit bigger, you can fix it now. Once I finish sewing my interfacing, I give it a nice steam with the iron and make sure everything is flat. Then I place my two pieces together, making sure that the fabric is toward the inside and the interfacing is towards you. You can use pins or you can use clips. You will have to do the same with your lining and with your pocket. Always make sure that the right side of the fabric is towards the inside. Some fabrics will be harder, so I keep saying this because you will encounter a fabric that you won't be able to decide which side is the right side or which side is the wrong side. Once you have all your pieces together, you are ready to start sewing. The seams for this project are around half an inch. Usually sewing machines have lines where you can align it to that line and make sure that you're doing an even seam all around your projects. As you can see in here, I'm going back and forward. That way I make sure that the seam is not gonna open. And then as I'm sewing, you can see that my edge is staying right there with that line I showed you. Make sure to go back and forward when you end and then cut your threads as close as possible. As you can see in here, the seam is almost half an inch. Whichever amount of seam you want to use around your pattern, make sure all of them have the same amount: the top, the lining, and the pocket. Once you do this, you want to cut the seam to a quarter inch because it's a curve. If you leave it, it will bunch up because of the curve it has. You have to do this cut in all three pieces: the top, the lining, and the pocket. Usually I like to iron my seams, but because this one has a pretty big curve, I'm just gonna use my fingers and pull. I'm gonna do a seam on top to one side. In this case, it's gonna be to the right side, and I'm gonna stay close to the seam. I'm pushing everything to the right. I'm pushing and pulling with my fingers and just sewing on the top. That way, this will keep the fabric nice and open, and it will give it some strength too. Just make sure, since it has a big curve, that you open as you sew. You want it nice and flat. Go back and forth, cut your threads, and do the same with the pocket and the lining. You can see in here That's how close I did the stitch to the front, and you can see how nice and clean it looks. I will be doing that same stitch on my lining. And to avoid a lot of seams going in the same direction, I am doing the lining going to the right too. And you will understand this later once you're putting it together why I am doing this. Just as you did with the top, you want to make sure everything is going to the right side. Open it with your fingers and make sure that you sew as it's really open. I didn't mention this before. All the seams I am starting from the top part of the mask, which would be the area of the nose. Tuck your ends, cut your threads, and now you're ready for the pocket. Because I'm using the interfacing, I'm gonna have a lot of fabric to one side. So as I told you, for the lining, do the seam to the right side. Once you put them together, you can see that you have one seam to one side and then one seam to the other side. For the pocket, I'm gonna keep the seam to the same side as I did for the lining. That way, I have four pieces of fabric on the top fabric, and then the other seams are gonna be to the other side, as you can see. That way, you distribute all that fabric to different areas. Once you know which side you want that seam, you just go ahead and do a stitch. As you can see, I'm doing that stitch to the right side too. Always make sure to cut your threads, and now once you've done this, you can see a nice clean stitch and you're ready to do the sides of your pocket. For the sides, all you need to do is fold it once and then fold it again. You can iron this if it makes it easier for you, or you can pin it. Then you can add a stitch at the very edge of the fabric. Do this on both sides of the pocket. Once again, you want to fold it. You can flatten with your fingers or you can use an iron and then fold again. The size of the seam depends on your preference. Mine is less than half an inch. Just make sure both sides are the same. And you want a seam very close to the edge. We have all our pieces in here. Once I do a seam, I like to iron to make sure it's nice and flat. So for my pocket, I make sure I take the seam and just iron those seams really nicely. Now I'm ready to place the pocket on top of the lining. I try to match the seams as best as I can and make sure all fabrics are facing towards the top. Place a pin where the seams meet and then place another one on each side to hold the pocket to the lining. There is one extra step I do for this, and I do it because it's really hard to cut a fabric with this shape, but it's easier to draw it. I take a pencil and I just draw my seam, but I don't draw from the center. I started the line probably around an inch from the center, and I'm just marking where I'm gonna be doing the seam. I am doing this by eye, but if you want to use a ruler because it's easier, you can do this too. Mark your seam on both sides, and this is the way you can do it if you're gonna use a ruler. You can mark dots and then just with your pencil put them together. Then once you get to the center, I'm gonna go higher. Instead of half an inch, which would be there, I'm gonna go higher a quarter of an inch. And I am gonna do a nice curve. Why do I do this? Mainly because it helps with the lenses not to get foggy. So if you wear glasses, this is a great way to avoid your glasses getting foggy. You want to have that nice curve around your nose. Just make sure that it's even, you find your center and it's even on both sides. Once I do my seam, I make sure that I go where the line looks best. Once I have that mark, I take my lining and I place it with the top part of my mask. So you want to match that line with the other seam. Just make sure that you are centered, and then you can place a pin to make sure that they don't move. As you can see, I have two seams to one side from the lining and the pocket, and then the other seams from the top part of the mask are going to the other side, and then I make sure that I clip or pin everything together. You want to make sure that the right sides are facing each other. The lining is a little bit smaller than the top part of your fabric, and that's because once you finish, you don't have that much fabric excess and it's gonna be less bulky. Once you have everything put together, you're ready to sew that top part. I forgot to film this part, but you can see I made a seam and I follow the line. And once I do that, I am ready to cut the excess fabric. Because of the curve in there, if you don't do that, it's not gonna lay flat. So you need to get rid of some fabric. So you wanna cut as close as 1/4 of an inch from the seam and make sure to follow that curve. Once you cut this, you want to open and you will see the top part, and then you will see the pocket and your lining. Now I am gonna take my iron and I'm gonna make sure that my seam is flat. My seam right now is facing towards the lining, and I'm not gonna be able to do everything because of the curve, but I want to do the sides because it makes it easier. So move the seam towards the lining and make sure that everything is flat. Now you have to deal with the nose part, which is that curve that you have to push outside. You can press your finger in there and just push it with your finger towards the top and make sure that the seam from the lining goes more towards the inside so you don't see it. I take my time and make sure that all that lining goes more towards the inside. You want to see just the top part of the fabric, but you want this to be clean and precise. You can use your fingers, you can iron it, and this will help you have a very clean edge. Do the same in both sides. You want to make sure it's nice and flat, that you don't see your lining, and then you iron. And once you're ready, you do the same with the nose part. Because of the curve, it will be more difficult to iron it, but you can do this. Also, if you want, you can push that with a knife or any tool that will help you get that edge. Once you have it, make sure your lining is towards the inside and you can lightly press to make sure it stays put. As you can see, we already have a nice clean edge. But to make sure this stays like this, I'm gonna do a top stitch. Just go to your sewing machine and do a nice top stitch at the very edge of your mask. Remember, I'm still working on the top part of my mask. Once you reach the center part, make sure to slow down and manually to the stitches just so you don't break a needle because there's a lot of fabric there. Once you pass the center, just go ahead and stitch the rest. Once you do the top stitching, you're ready to deal with your bottom part. And to make sure that you don't have excess fabric, what I do is I make sure that all the seams in the center are just flat and even. I am making sure that they're flat, that they're pressed together, and then I place a needle to keep them in place. With your fingers, just make sure that all the seams are together, then check your edges. I am making sure that all the seams meet. With my fingers, I'm making sure that they're flat. And as you can see, I'm gonna place a pin not too close to the edge. You will have some excess fabric. And this is because once you turn the mask after you do the top seam, since you're turning it inside, it will be a little bit bigger and longer. So usually some people don't do this, but I make sure that I have a flat mask inside. So I iron it and make sure that I put a pin so any excess fabric will show and I can cut it before I do a seam. Place pins and then do the other side. Just flatten it, iron it, and place pins. If you don't do this, you might have a lot of fabric inside and it won't be flat. You can see in here how much excess fabric I have. So now all I'm going to do is cut that excess fabric up. I'm gonna do it first on one side till the center seam. And then once I do that, I am going to fold the mask and cut the other side. That way I make sure that both sides are the same. Fold your mask, meet the seams on top, and then cut the excess and make sure that the mask is even on both sides. And now you can see you have a nice even mask. Now you're ready to flip this and do a seam. So take your pins off, but make sure that the pocket and the lining are still attached. So put a pin or a clip. Do the same on each side and the center too. So before you take your pins, make sure both the lining and the pocket are pinned together. At this point, you want to take the pin from the top, and now you're ready to just take that pocket lining and just flip it all the way to the front. And now you're gonna meet all the seams. So make sure that your seams are meeting and you want to pin them. Once you do the center, you want to do the sides. You can pin or clip. And now all you have to do is do a seam there. I already did my seam. I didn't have to mark this one because it's just a basic shape, but you want to cut it a quarter of an inch. so you don't have that excess fabric all around there and it would make a flat seam. Once you cut it, you are ready to flip this. So I make sure that I grab my top part with one hand and then the pocket and the lining with the other side. Once I do that, I push with my fingers one side towards the other side. Just make sure that you're grabbing the pocket with the lining and just keep pushing. Then you will be able to grab the corner from the other side and just pull. Be kind to your fabric, you don't want to stretch it a lot. Now you want to make sure that everything is properly placed. So just play with it, make sure that the seams in the front are together, just push them together. And you want to make sure that the bottom seam is towards the inside. Use your finger like you're ironing, just press them towards the lining. You can also use a knife to help you take that edge out. Just make sure to press at the top part of the seam and press out. Same as you did with your top, you don't want to see the lining, you just want to see the top part. Once you have it ready, you can take your iron and press. This will help the seam stay in place and it will flatten everything. You want to make sure that everything is nice and flat and you don't have pockets all around. Then do the same on the other side. Open your seam, make sure everything is nice and clean. You can use the knife. Remember, you will need to push on the top part of the mask so you don't see the lining coming out. And then you can press. When you press, make sure that everything is nice and flat. And now you can make a stitch to finish this area. As you can see, this is the seam I did for the bottom part. It's nice and close to the edge. And now we're ready to finish the sides of our mask. For the mask side, you want to leave enough space so you can insert either a cord or an elastic. You will need to fold it twice. You can clip it or pin it. This seam needs to be no less than half an inch. So if you are not sure, just make sure to measure. Once you're ready, you want to stitch this and make sure you're at the edge, but you want to make sure you go back and forth a couple of times to make sure this is strong because this part will be pulling a little bit with the cord or the elastic and you don't want that seam to open. So do it at the top, then once you reach that edge, do it again to make sure it's strong and then go all the way down and tack it again. Cut your threads as close as possible to the edge to make sure it's nice and clean. Then do the same on the other side. Here is another part I missed filming, but I marked a line with pencil, with sewing pencil that can be erased, and I did a stitch. This is so I can place a piece of wire inside. It's like a little pocket. You will only need to do this seam one time. Just make sure you have pins holding the fabric together. I'm doing it twice so I can show you what I did before. I'm starting at the edge where the pocket starts. So where that seam starts, that's where I'm starting my seam, and take it to the edge where the pocket is. Then I'm gonna leave a space. It can be half an inch, it can be less. I am doing this so that the wire stays in place. So you just want to do a little seam in there just to make sure the wire doesn't go anywhere and go back and forward. Make sure to cut your threads very close to the fabric so it's clean. Once I'm done, I like to iron everything to make sure that everything is flat to each side and then the top. Once I have my mask iron, I am ready to place the wire and place the cord, or you can use elastic if you prefer. This is a step that is really not necessary, but I thought I might just have fun with this one and add a little bit of a detail. So I found this rose and I'm just gonna steam it in place. There are many appliques in the market, and this is a fun way to finish a mask. So if you want to make yours extra special, you can go ahead and put appliques, or you can put anything you want in it. Just have fun with it. When you're putting appliques, you want to make sure that the heat will melt the glue and it's gonna stay in place. Make sure to check that everything is glued well, and if it's not, just go ahead and steam. Follow the directions for the applique. Once it's cooled down, you want to check the sides to make sure everything is sticking well. And now you're ready to finish your mask. I will be using parachute cord for the side of my mask. Some people use elastic. Some people hate the elastic because it bothers their ears. So it depends on what you want to use. I cut the parachute cord around 50 inches in length. And once you cut it, you want to make sure that the ends of the cord are finished. How do I do this? I use a lighter. So once you cut, you take a lighter and you burn the sides. I usually put it at the base of the fire, and then when I see it starts to melt, I just press it lightly with my hands. Be careful, it's hot. So when you press, if you want to use your fingers, be fast. I will be using a loop turner to place my cord inside the mask. There are many tools in the markets you can use to help yourself put thread through a seam. This is one of my favorite ones. It's all, you can see is all curved and everything, but this is a really neat tool. You just hook it and just pull it. Once it's pulled, you want to make a knot so it doesn't come out of the mask. And you want to do this on both sides. The loop goes on top and the open pieces of the parachute cord goes towards the bottom part of the mask. That way you can pull it and make a knot at the base of your neck and make it as tight as you want. For the wire, you can use fuzzes. These you can find in any craft store. All you have to do is fold the edge and twist it to make sure that the edge is not going to poke you. Plus, that loop will help you insert the wire inside the mask. Once you have your wire ready, you insert your loop turner inside the hole you made and just pull the wire through it. And then you're done. Another option is using the wire that comes in medical masks. These medical masks are usually a one-time use. Maybe you can use it a couple of times, but they get dirty and you have to throw them away. So you can take the wire out of it and use it on your mask. Just open a hole and take it out, and you can place it inside the mask the same way you place the other one. This wire is nice and sturdy, and you really don't need a looper to place it inside the mask. You just push it through the hole and make sure that you center it in the mask. Just play with it, slide it in the fabric, and it moves really easily. And once in the center, you're able to wear it. If you don't have one of these medical grade masks, you can make your own wire too. This is a wire I use for my gum paste flowers. You might be able to use florist wire too. I am using wire number 22 and I measure the size and then I'm turning the corners. I am making a small loop. I am making sure that the loop is completely closed so the wire doesn't poke me. Once I do that, I take some tape. I am using packing tape. It's a little bit stronger than the normal tape and it's wider. That way you can place the wire in the center and cut around it. Place the wire and then fold it. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to be cutting around it. Make sure it's glued well and then with scissors just cut around it. And it will look almost like the ones in the surgical masks. As you know, this mask has a pocket. You can wear the mask with no filter or you can add a filter to it. If you have a surgical mask, you can cut it open and cut it in two and insert it in the pocket. And this would work great. You would have to take this off to wash the mask. Once you insert it, you just have to make sure it lays flat. Then when you decide to wash the mask, take it out and you can reuse it again. Some people use coffee filters, or you can use these pre-made filters. You can buy them in Amazon. Same thing, you just place it inside, make sure it's flat, and you can use your mask and then take it out when you need to wash it. To take care of your mask, I would recommend to wash by hand. Just put some water in a bucket, put some soap, and leave it there for a few hours and then rinse it. Once dry, you can iron it. If you just used it for a little bit and you don't want to wash it yet, you can spray it with Lysol and let it air dry, or you can steam it or iron it with a very hot iron to kill any bacteria from it. And this is the finished mask. Remember, masks are not gonna save you from getting sick, but it's a good reminder not to put your hands on your face. It is very important to wash your hands and just stay safe. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Visit me in Facebook, Instagram, and until next time, ta-ta!